First person to guess my favourite Jordan, I'll PayPal you $50 right now.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball. Another season preview podcast for you guys today. We're going to be looking at the Miami Heat, and to talk about the Heat I'm joined by one of the hosts of the Locked On Heat podcast, and that is Wes Goldberg, back for a third year doing the season preview with me. Wes, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I look forward to this every year. We don't talk a whole lot of fantasy hoops on Locked On Heat. This is kind of like the only chance I get to do it, so it's always a good time.
There's going to be quite a bit to talk about with this team because there are some interesting guys returning from injury, some open roster spots still on the team, some players who potentially could be looking to take some steps forward. So
let's get to it.
All right, let's get to it indeed. We will start just by having a look at the question I always start these shows with. Is the projected record for this team. You've gone with 47-35, which is well above the Vegas total of 41.5. This team made the playoffs, first round exit to the Philadelphia 76ers as the 6th seed last season. Why do you view them more positively than the Vegas line consensus?
Well, first of all, they finished with 44 wins last year, and for Vegas to dock them 3 wins, I'm not sure why they did that. You know, this team should, if anything, be more healthy than they were last year. So you would think that they would be around 44 wins. Hassan Whiteside was injured for a lot of the year. He played hurt for a lot of the year. Dion Waiters obviously missed most of the season. They'll get him back. James Johnson was apparently playing with a hernia for most of the final part of the season, and that probably led to his inconsistencies on both ends of the floor, and he recently underwent a procedure too to fix that, and so he should be even healthier. So if anything, they should finish with about the same amount of wins. And look, I mean, a lot of teams in the East right now got worse. You look at the Cavaliers, they're out of the way essentially. I don't know that a whole lot of teams in the East got any better, and so I don't really see why Vegas would bring them down 3 or 4 wins. I originally had them around 45 wins, but then, you know, I think maybe my local Miami Heat bias got in the way, and I upped it up to 47, just because I do think that there is some value in the continuity of the team. This is a superstarless team, right? Despite their many attempts over the years to replace LeBron with a new superstar. But there is something to be said when there is continuity and there's a familiarity with it on offense and a familiarity on defense. And I think with Eric Spoelstra coaching this team, I think that gets discounted a lot when we do these win totals, and so I think the Heat probably end up hovering around between 45 and 47 wins this season.
Your logic makes sense. They were injury plagued last season. There's something else that I think is a factor, and this is not something that Miami Heat fans would want to hear, but the fact that at this point Dwayne Wade's not on the team, and he wasn't actually a positive contributor to them for the second half of the season. So maybe that's addition by subtraction if they don't actually have to give him 32% usage and 22 minutes per night. Some other players who are actually in a better position and might be able to use those possessions more efficiently or more effectively than what Wade did last season, but he could always return to this team. So I tend to agree with you that the over there is probably the way to go. Now, the projected leading scorer on this team, you've gone with Goran Dragic. He was the leader last season. We have heard some words coming out from Pat Riley saying he thinks that Josh Richardson can get to 18 points per game. That seems a little far-fetched, but how far do you think that gap is between, say, Dragic and Richardson as that leading scorer is? Is it possible for Richardson to push up there, or is Dragic clearly that guy?
I love that comment by Pat Riley. It's kind of that like classic Riley, like just trying to egg him on motivation kind of thing. Can Josh Richardson be an 18 points per game scorer? I think so. He had a great December, and I think fantasy owners that had him will remember that. And then a good first half to January, I believe. 18 points a game, though, consistently is tough, and I don't see Richardson getting there, especially with the re-addition of Dion Waiters, because let's remember, Richardson got that opportunity to be sort of that second score because of two things. And the number one thing was that Dion Waiters got hurt after the first 30 games, and then, of course, that Hassan Whiteside was underperforming. Now, if Whiteside is healthy and Waiters is healthy, Richardson's not going to get the same opportunity that he had last year. That said, he'll get an opportunity, but it'll probably be as the tertiary scorer, not the secondary scorer. And so I think with Dragic being the primary ball handler, understanding how to score on a consistent basis, which I think was Josh Richardson's most glaring weakness last year, was that at some games he'll go off for 22 points, the other game he'll put up 6. Dragic kind of routinely hovered between 14 and 20, 21 points a game. And so for that reason, for the consistency over the 82-game stretch of the season, I still think that gap is pretty wide, Josh, and I want to see more from Josh Richardson, but I just don't. I'm not convinced that he has the consistency to put up that 18 points per game. He did score 13 points a game last year, which was good. I don't see that going up by 5 points per game.
The consistency thing is interesting, and you brought up December. In December, he played 15 games last season. He averaged 17.5 points in those 15 games. That's obviously really impressive. He had a true shooting, though, of 66%, so he was shooting out of his ass. 47% from 3 during that time, 55% overall from the field. But inconsistency has been a problem because he started the year, the 6 games in October, 31% from 3. The 15 games in November, 25% from 3. But then the next 3 months, 47, 42, 46, and then 38% in March from 3. So really got it going back to that sort of level of efficiency we saw from him in his rookie season. The second season, he was way down in efficiency. So he's all over the place in terms of where that efficiency lies. Now, if he can keep that up, which he did for a 4-month stretch there, December through to March, and extend that to 6 months, then you're talking about 15, 16 points instead of 13 points. But we just don't know what we're going to get from Richardson. I think the overwhelming body of work through his 3 seasons is that he leans to an above average shooter, but whether he can be a 40% guy or if it's 37%, that is a difference, and that might be the difference of, half a point per game, and then, the more confidence you get, the better you shoot, the more touches you get, the more relied upon you are in the offense, and that can push it up even further. So if he can maintain that, which he did for 4 months, not quite as high as that December mark, then there's a possibility there. But Dragic,
If I could add one more thing on Josh Richardson, that consistency has dogged him throughout his career, and isn't that what separates like an all-star player and superstar players from the rest of the bunch, is that consistency? Now, we talked about there's an addition by subtraction of Dwayne Wade. The one thing that Dwayne Wade does bring for the Heat is a guy like Josh Richardson and Justice Winslow too. They had a lot more confidence when Wade was there, and I think that there's a behind-the-scenes mentor thing that's happening there, and that second surge by Josh Richardson kind of coincides with Dwayne Wade coming back to Miami, and so that could be helpful for him. And that confidence is a great point that you brought up, because that's sort of been Josh Richardson's issue. But this summer, he's working more on the isolation part of his game, a lot, trying to keep the ball on a string, to use his words. And so that might be more of a focus. And look, I think that's probably from the Heat, right? And that's a good sign, if you're looking at maybe drafting a guy like Josh Richardson, is that the Heat want him to improve those aspects of his game, which means that they probably, if he does that, they'll probably go to him in isolation situations. Because there are a lot of times at the end of the season, even with a guy like Dragic on the floor, even with a guy like Wade on the floor at times, that he would run a play for Josh Richardson at the end of the game. So that's something that Spoelstra trusts him to do, and that could be good news for owners of Richardson or people that look to maybe draft him.
I meant to use this segment to talk about Dragic, but we've got onto Richardson, so let's continue to talk about Richardson. We'll get back to Dragic in a second. Last season, I believe it was on this podcast, I made the bold proclamation that I thought Richardson was his team's best player. I was shit on by many, many different people. Would you say 1 year later that is an accurate statement?
You were right.
Thank you.
Yeah,
there we
Josh
go.
Richardson was the best player for the Heat on both ends of the court. I mean, defensively, his ability to get steals, and he started doing this also later in the season. I think some of that had to do with Josh Richardson maybe having to do a lot more on offense than he was accustomed to earlier in the year, and then there was an adjustment period. But also, I think Miami played a conservative style of defense that I think towards the playoffs and in the playoffs too, sort of amped up the aggression on the defense because they needed to score. They needed to start scoring more points, and tried to create turnovers and jump passing lanes. But Richardson is one of the most valuable guys on the Heat, and probably in the league too. I probably got to do the math on that, but in just generating steals and turning those into transition points, obviously he's not Russell Westbrook in that respect, but that should if maybe he's not getting as many touches when a guy like Dwayne Wade and Dion Waiters and Whiteside are scoring and they're on the court and they're healthy, maybe that he's able to on defense then, ramp up the aggression, jump those passing lanes, and create some transition opportunities for himself and for his teammates.
He is obviously really, really adept with those defensive numbers. He is a guy that can average over 1.5 steal and over a block per game, which as a guard is really, really fantastic. He was the 57th ranked player last season in fantasy. At the moment, Yahoo's got him ranked 56. I think he can actually do better than that this season. Again, if that consistency comes on and he, in his 4th season, steps up the usage, even if it's 1 or 2 usage points, then he can become that guy who does become a top 50 player. As for Dragic, I think he is overranked. Yahoo's got him at 54. I don't really see the rationale behind that. He was the 80th ranked player last season, so they're expecting him to take a leap forward from last year. He is 32 years of age. I think it's unlikely that he takes a step forward this season. And one thing that did happen with Dragic last season was his legendary efficiency really dropped off. He was down at 45%. Go back a couple of years ago, he was a 50% finisher with his field goal percentage for multiple seasons, and that's dropped off. Is that an anomaly? Is that a factor of age, him just being a little bit slower off the burst in terms of his finishing around the rim, or was it just a weird one-season thing where you could see that coming back?
No, you've been able to see a little bit. He's starting to be less efficient around the rim because of the age. He is a little bit slower. And give Dragic some credit here. He's trying to combat that by a couple things. He's taking more perimeter jumpers, and he's getting fouled on perimeter jumpers a little bit more consistently, and can sort of call on that when he needs to. But yeah, I do think that you're probably right. 17.3 points per game last season, 4.8 assists last season, he's a borderline all-star talent. Made the all-star game in the East because of as an injury replacement. That's probably his last All-Star game, and that was probably going to be his last All-Star level season. I just think at his age, with where he's at and sort of what his game is, I think you're going to start seeing the next phase of his career happen this year, in which he's more of a floor general, a controlling, consistent kind of coach on the floor type presence, which is great for, having on. If you're the Heat, you need that kind of player, especially given the fact that they're probably relying on some more inconsistent players and some more youth offensively. You need that Dragic presence. But as far as his fantasy production is concerned, not as great, right? So, I think you're right. We might be seeing the last great... This might be like his last... that might have been his last good season.
We already saw him drop 2 minutes per game last year. He'd been a top 60 guy for the previous 3 seasons, and the lowest field goal percentage he'd shot was 48%. So he's a guy that's always been a lowish steals guy, a lowish assist guy, and his fantasy value had come from scoring and doing it on really high efficiency. And when that drops, and if it drops by 3-4 percentage points, which it did last season, that means the points come down 2 or 3 per game, and you don't have those assists, you don't have the steals, he's not a high rebound guy, he's not blocking shots like what Josh Richardson does, then the rank starts to plummet. So he went from 44th in 16-17 down to 80th last season. I think we see a little bit of a slip again, and definitely you don't want to be looking at drafting him in that 54 spot where he is on Yahoo. That just seems way too high. Injuries, Wes, there are a couple. We talked about how this team was bothered by them last season. How's Dion Waiters' ankle going? Because he missed majority of the season, but from everything that I understand is that he's not even guaranteed to be back for the start of the year. This is an injury that happened 2 years ago. He didn't get surgery because he wanted to get paid. The Heat seemed to know that. Then he played, 30 games and then had that surgery. It was a whole weird situation to me, and it looks like it could be a thing that does bother him throughout the rest of his career.
Yeah, he was super inefficient in those 30 games. Shot 39%, almost 40% from the field in total in those 30 games he played, and didn't look good. And that's why he ended up going with the surgery and everything like that. And hopefully this isn't something that bothers him. The Heat they're taking it slow, right? And so he might not start the season, and so he's the projected starter at shooting guard. But that might not be the case to begin the season. It might be like Tyler Johnson or somebody else who's starting at that spot. So I think the Heat recognize that this is a concern. The Miami Heat training staff is one of the best in the league, and so you look at the way they've been able to sort of put a guy like Dwayne Wade on a maintenance program and get the most out of guys like James Johnson in the past and things like that. you hope that they have the right approach when it comes to Dion Waiters, but then you hope that Dion Waiters also has the right approach. He has been training in Miami with Dwayne Wade's trainer and LeBron's trainer, those famous biomechanics guys who sort of elongated those careers of LeBron and Wade. So you hope maybe something there will click, right, with Dion, and he starts to really take even better care of his body since he's sort of been doing that since coming to Miami. It's hard to know what will happen with Waiters, but certainly if he's not healthy, his production plummets more so than I think most players, just because he's not a consistent shooter from deep. He really relies on getting to the rim and sort of having his outside jumper play off of that. And when he can't finish at the rim because of that ankle, it really, really hurts his effectiveness.
Look, if we're going to be honest, he was terrible last season. A true shooting of under 50%, a large usage, played 30 minutes per game. And on the surface, you go, 14 points and almost 4 assists, that can be useful. But he doesn't rebound the ball at all. He gets no steals. The shooting is bad from the field. The shooting is bad from the free throw line. He doesn't hit huge volumes of threes. 1.7 is fine, but it's not up in that 2.2, 2.5 mark, which would actually boost his numbers. And for a guy that played 31 minutes and scored 14 points per game, he was still the 183rd ranked guy on a per game basis. Now, I think that he'll struggle to get to that 31-minute mark again this season because, Dwayne Wade may or may not be there, but with Justice Winslow heading into his 4th season, there's more minutes there. We've got that front court situation with James Johnson and Kelly Olynyk and Bam Adebayo and Hassan Whiteside getting those minutes. So that perhaps for me moves Winslow down to the 3 a bit more. Maybe that means Richardson has to play more at the 2. There's Tyler Johnson in that mix there as well. So I think 31 minutes for Waiters with the ankle problem and the fact that he's still not fully healthy and the inefficiency, it feels like that's probably an unrealistic expectation unless you've got something different to say, or they're just going to bang him in and go 31 minutes. Here you go, Dion, you're the starter. I don't see it being that way.
Well, I've been saying on Locked On Heat, the best way to view the Heat's lineup is as a 3-guard unit. They have so many guys that play guard there. When you consider Dragic and Tyler Johnson, Dion Waiters, Dwayne Wade, Josh Richardson, Wayne Ellington, and you mentioned Justice Winslow, who plays a lot of point guard for them off the bench sometimes. So that's 7 guys that you sort of have to figure out time for. But the way Spoelstra, I think, is going to go about it, and by the way, that's not including a guy like Rodney Magruder, who Spoelstra will try to shoe in every once in a while, get him some minutes. But
even Derrick Jones, who they signed.
And Derrick Jones, Derrick Jones Jr., who looked really good from 3-point range during Summer League. They might try to get him some run. But instead of looking at getting those like 6 or 7 guys playing time at 2 positions, you're really looking at 6 or 7 guys at 3 positions, right? Because they're going to use those 3 perimeter spots on basically all guards because they don't have a true small forward really on the roster. So with that said, maybe you start getting a little bit more playing time, but I agree with you, Dion Waiters, 31 minutes a game seems high, especially if he's not going to be productive. They didn't have Dwayne Wade at the start of last season when they had Dion. So they have a guy in Wade who, if Wade comes back, obviously that's the big part here. I think he's coming back, but I have no significant material evidence that that's going to happen. But if they do get a guy like Wade back, then all of a sudden you have a couple of guys who can create off the dribble and get their own shot. But if Josh Richardson continues with the progress that we were talking about, then maybe you have another guy too. But that's the real value of Dion Waiters. If Wade doesn't come back, and if Josh Richardson doesn't progress with the way that the Heat coaching staff is hoping, then maybe you start seeing Dion get to those 30 minutes a game because, again, he is kind of, in that entire group, the only guy who could sort of just get his own shot off the dribble and just create for himself.
The other 2 guys who are dealing with injuries are the 2 Johnsons. Tyler Johnson had a thumb issue and James Johnson had that hernia. I don't think there is any concern about them being ready to start the season, unlike Waiters. Anything to be worried about with either of the Johnsons?
James Johnson, I think, will have a better year than last year. What's great about him is he just sort of loads up the box score. He, rebounds, assists, doing all the things. I expect him to be the starter when the season begins, because there's just not anybody else on the roster that sort of does what he does. As far as Tyler Johnson, I would probably run away from him. When you kind of look at the depth of Heat guards and what all of them do well, I feel like Tyler could end up getting the short straw here as far as minutes go. And so that's, despite him being in the first year of when that big contract that he signed a couple of years ago, this is the first year where it balloons to $19 million. this could be the least he plays during his contract, unless something shakes out on the trade market, of course.
He played 29 minutes per game last season, was the 137th ranked player. Where's over under 25 minutes for Tyler Johnson? I think he suffers a pretty big hit this year.
Oh, I would say way under, especially if Dion's healthy. If Dion Waiters is healthy, because that's the reason Tyler Johnson played so much.
Exactly.
He went from 6-man to starter. Now that said, if Waiters is healthy and Tyler Johnson goes back to 6-man, he's going to be more productive than he was last year. He'll certainly be more efficient than he was last year, but he won't play as many minutes. I wouldn't be surprised if he's able to be the 6-man, especially if Wade doesn't come back. If he's the 6-man and actually scores more points, is more productive in fewer minutes because he's thrived much more against by going up against opposing second units than he did against opposing starters. That said, yeah, I'd say way below, and I wouldn't touch Tyler Johnson right now.
He was 137th last year. I said for some reason Yahoo's decided that he's going to be better this year, and he's ranked 93rd. You obviously should be avoiding that like the plague. But at this point, there is literally one point guard on this roster. Is Tyler Johnson the backup point guard? Because he's not really a point guard, but there's nobody else.
Yeah, not really. I think most depth charts will probably list him as backup point guard. I think that's inaccurate. He mostly he's kind of Wayne Ellington's backup more than anything. They run a lot of the same motions for him as far as coming off screens and catch and shoot type plays that they have. I would say your backup point guard. If Dwayne Wade comes back, he's the backup point guard. Then Dion Waiters will probably get some point guard duties when Dragic is off the floor. They tend to stagger their minutes a little bit. And then, of course, there's Justice Winslow, who I think you're going to see even more point guard usage from Justice going forward, because they do have some front court position that they have to some front court minutes that they have to loosen up and use for guys like Kelly Olynyk and Bam Adebayo.
As for James Johnson, he's the 83rd ranked player on Yahoo. Last season, he finished the 98th. 83 might be a little bit high for Johnson, but as I said, he was dealing with that injury, that hernia issue, so he could perhaps be better. He could also be worse because he is an older player. He's going to turn 32 during the season, so he's far from a young guy, and physical declines can happen at any time, especially for guys who aren't considered elite type players. Those drop-offs can really be quick and unexpected, so there is that risk there with Johnson. I definitely wouldn't be reaching into the 80s to try and grab him. But we know what he can do. He can score, he hits threes, he blocks, he steals, he gets assists, he does all those things. But there is a possibility, especially when you consider how well Kelly Olynyk played in the playoffs as well, that maybe Johnson loses a minute of playing time there. Depends on how they want to run things. So I think there's an element of risk if you went to take him at 83, which I wouldn't look to do. Let's change direction here and have a look at the two-way guys on this team, Duncan Robinson and Yante Meten. Is it now? I'm pretty sure I screwed that up. How do I pronounce that?
That's a great question. I don't know. I haven't gotten the media guide yet. Your guess is as good as mine.
All right, let's just go with it's probably the last time I'm going to say that name all season. But Duncan Robinson was impressive in Summer League. One thing was I want to give a shout out to the Heat. I love how all their Summer League guys, they all just wear numbers in the 60s. It's a tradition they always do. I don't know why they do it, but it's always interesting. So it's always weird seeing guys out there in numbers 60, 62, 64 out on the court. But Duncan Robinson was one of those guys. He was impressive in Summer League, earned himself a two-way deal. And this is a team who doesn't actually have a full roster at this spot. So he could see some minutes. The Heat are renowned for developing these guys. You talked about Rodney Magruder earlier on. Hassan Whiteside was one of those players, just getting guys off the scrap heap, out of the G League, and using them. So Duncan Robinson could be one of those guys this season.
Yeah, look, I mean, Duncan Robinson's a guy that the Heat have had eyes on basically since college. He told me actually during Summer League that he knew that had he gone undrafted and he expected to go undrafted, that the Heat were going to put an offer into him that was pretty much already put in place. Those mechanics were set in motion much before the draft even started. And so this is a guy that the Heat already liked, right? And he proved why there was definitely some assurance during Summer League why they liked him. Is that three-point shot. He's really good at shooting threes. He understands that's where his bread is buttered, and he's a very intense guy. He's a hard worker. That's why the Heat like him. That's why they had eyes for him in the first place. So that said, it's going to take some guys probably getting hurt above him for him to play. I see Duncan Robinson as more of a long-term play, sort of in the same way that the Heat went after a guy like Matt Williams out of my alma mater, UCF, last year for a two-way guy. Sort of that maybe Wayne Ellington in waiting kind of position, because Ellington signing these short-term deals. There is going to come a point where they're not going to be able to re-sign him without paying too much of a luxury tax that they're going to be unwilling to pay. So I think they're grooming these three-point shooters who can just do enough defensively, maybe enough off the dribble as far as attacking closeouts goes. They're trying to groom one of these guys in order to replace Wayne Ellington, but that's not going to be this season. It's probably going forward next season. But they've sort of, since the emergence of this two-way contract, every team gets two of them. They've earmarked one of them for sort of a three-point specialist.
Let's go to a different direction now. In terms of this team and their overall perception, national media-wise, or just the general idea, is there anything that is covered nationally on this team that is somewhat of a myth or a misconception, something that gets misreported that makes you guys, local guys, tear your hair out?
Not necessarily misreported, but maybe taken for granted the fact that this team is cap strong and they just have no cap room, not a whole lot of movable assets, and no real path to shaking the roster up. We're not even talking about going and getting a superstar. Really, just a major roster shakeup isn't really in the cards. I'll say this: I'm not one of these in Riley we trust, fans that will just trust in Riley no matter what, no matter how dark the situation looks. But I will say, this team is and will actively try to make a move if it means making the team better. Not necessarily right now, but for the summer of 2019. I think this team, Pat Riley specifically has a motivation to create more flexibility for next summer. And so you could see one of these contracts shake up. And the guy that keeps being mentioned in trade talks is Hassan Whiteside, at least from a local angle. And the Heat would like to trade Hassan Whiteside as far as from what I'm hearing, but that might not be possible because there's not a whole lot of NBA teams that want a center and don't necessarily want a guy like Hassan Whiteside. So you could see a guy like Goran Dragic get traded, or you could see a guy like Kelly Olynyk get traded, one of their more efficient offensive players like that, because they have so much more value. Nobody's going to trade for Dion, not when he's coming off that ankle injury. James Johnson's a little iffy, even though I think there are teams that would like a player like that. And I don't think the Heat are particularly motivated to move on from one of their younger assets, like a Josh Richardson or a Justice Winslow. So you could see a guy like Goran Dragic or Kelly Olynyk get moved. And if that's the case, maybe they get something of value back. But as far as just the narratives, there are ways to get where they want to be. And I wouldn't just pigeonhole them into a situation of this is their team. They're pretty much stuck here for the foreseeable future.
Let's talk Whiteside now. He's 1 year removed from being the 26th ranked player in fantasy, where he played 33 minutes a night. Wasn't the case last year. Only 54 games, 25 minutes. And yes, the people who will be Hassan Whiteside supporters will come out and say, oh yeah, he was injured. It was his knee that limited him. And that's true to a degree. But it wasn't the whole case, because there was clear animosity between him and the coaching staff, the way the league was trending. They've got two other centers who actually fit the league a lot better than what Whiteside does in Adebayo and Kelly Olynyk. So, whereas my question to you is, Hassan Whiteside, is it 25-minute Hassan Whiteside, or is it 30-minute Hassan Whiteside? How much of it was the knee injury, which again could be actually something that continues on, given he is a big man who's 29 years of age. That could be something that lingers. How much of it is him pissing and moaning, or how much of it is Spoelstra just thinking, this just isn't the best option for us?
I think Spoelstra's already come to that conclusion, and that's sort of why there was a rift between Whiteside and Spo during the playoffs. But I think you're going to see something closer to 25 minutes per game Whiteside. But this largely is determined by Hassan Whiteside and how he plays on the floor, specifically at the end of quarters and at the end of games. He'll have a tendency to start halves pretty strong sometimes, but not necessarily finish halves all that strong. He'll kind of have spurts. But the Heat do believe, or at least they're publicly saying, they think he was slowed down by injury. An injury he suffered against the Magic early in last season. They feel like that was bothering him for the entirety of the season. And if he's healthy, then all of a sudden that maybe you start getting 30 minutes per game, super productive and efficient Hassan Whiteside. The problem with Whiteside, though, is that we've been trying to figure this out for the last few years, is when is he just going to put it together and be more of a consistent player? And I just don't think he's a consistent player, and that is Whiteside. The positive of Whiteside is that he can just explode up for a triple-double with blocks one night, and the next night he just disappears and he's unplayable because he's not getting out on defense or trying hard enough. So I would lean more towards I would lean towards being cautious with Hassan Whiteside, probably more 25 minutes per game. Spoelstra trying to find more playing time for Kelly Olynyk and then Bam Adebayo as well. And then Udonis Haslem, if he returns, I think he'll probably try to work a few minutes in for him too. But the one thing I will say about Whiteside is he might be a good buy low candidate because he's probably going to drop in drafts because of the bad taste that people have in their mouths because of his playoff performance and his just lackluster season in general. If he's healthy, he might be playing 25 minutes a game, but it's going to be a more productive 25 minutes per game. I do like what I am seeing from him this summer, as opposed to last summer, for example. His whole conditioning routine was just getting as yoked as possible, and I think this year there's more of a focus on agility and foot speed and just trying to get more agile in order to play and switch a little bit more defensively and get out on the perimeter defensively, which means Spoelstra will keep him on the court longer, of course, best case scenario. So 25 minutes a game, possibly more productive if he's healthy.
He is an interesting guy, and what you said there about him dropping and maybe providing value is true because Yahoo has him ranked as the 84th best player. Last year he was the 48th best player. Now I think he can probably fit pretty comfortably in between those two numbers, but if he gets 27 a night or 28 a night, then he vaults easily back into the top 50. And something that was interesting with him last season is as the minutes started to decrease, when he returned from injury over the last 17 games of the season, his block rate rose. And that was something that had really dropped his value over the past couple of years. He was at 2.5 per 36 for the season. But over the last 17 games, he was at 2.9. And then the last 7 games of the regular season, he was at 3.6. Back to that more aggressive shot-blocking guy that was a first-round type talent 2 to 3 years ago because he was blocking 3 shots per game. Now, he's still going to be able to go out there and probably average over 10 boards and 13 points and do it on high efficiency. So there is still value in Whiteside, and I don't see him going too much under 25 minutes. I do think that despite all the negativity around him and the fact that he's just infuriating to watch and listen to at times, there is still going to be value in him there at that number 84 if he's still around. Now, he's always good for at least one baffling type social media video. He had that one, I can't remember what month it was in, where he was shooting threes and saying that the only reason he wasn't hitting them was because the coaching staff didn't let him. How many threes do you reckon he hits this season? Is it over or under 5?
Under. Come on. It's under. I mean, I've been talking a while about, how the Raptors have allowed Jonas Valanciunas to basically shoot his 1 3-pointer a game. Maybe that happens, but I don't see it. I think that Spo will keep he typically keeps a tight leash, not only on Whiteside, but on players in general, as far as, where and when they should be shooting from. But, look, at the end of the day, Whiteside is, at his best, is Miami's best center, and so the minutes are his to lose.
Yep.
Right? As good and as effective as Kelly Olynyk is, and as promising and exciting as Bam Adebayo is, when Whiteside is healthy and when Whiteside is playing at his best, he is easily Miami's most effective and impactful player at that position. So it is his minutes. They're his minutes to lose, but that is also can he bring it to the table?
I said that he was ranked 84th on Yahoo, which he is, but on ESPN he's ranked at 39th, and that's something where you don't want to take that risk. You don't want anything to do with him at pick 39. It's nonsense going with him there. So he's somewhere in the middle. So it depends on where you're playing, whether you avoid him or whether you take him. Depends on how that's sort of sitting in your particular league and where he's being drafted. The Miami Heat did not have any draft picks this season, so let's have a look at their projected starting 5. We've got Goran Dragic, Dion Waiters, Joshie Richardson, James Johnson, and Hassan Whiteside. A lot of people have asked me over the course of the season, is there any chance that Bam Adebayo takes that starting job off Whiteside? Is there any chance of that? Adebayo looked really good in Summer League. He showed flashes last season, but he was inconsistent. And realistically, at this point to me, he's the third string center on this team and probably isn't going to be an every night contributor. But unless you do disagree with that, how do you see where Bam fits in?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, and it's unfortunate because there is a lot of promise there. But Miami just has so many centers, and I think they signed Kelly Olynyk last year with the intention of playing him next to a guy like Whiteside, and that wasn't their net rating wasn't good together. They didn't play well together. They struggled to switch and to get out on a lot of these stretch fours and things like that, and so they started playing Olynyk more at center. So now you have a jam there, and barring a Whiteside trade, which I think is possible, right? I do think that if Whiteside comes back healthy and he looks really good in the first 20, 30 games of the year, and by February's trade deadline, Miami wants to move on, because I do think Miami is due for a move. Right now, they are over the luxury tax threshold, and that's not even including if Dwayne Wade and Udonis Haslem re-sign, right? So I think they are going to look to make a move by the deadline. If Whiteside's healthy, it could very well be Whiteside to a team that maybe is looking for some rim protection and rebounding help going into the playoffs. And if that's the case, then you could see Bam Adebayo become the starting center, and then Kelly Olynyk play next to him at power forward, because unlike the Whiteside-Olynyk combo, which didn't work, the Bam-Olynyk combo did work because Bam is so much more agile defensively, and he's able to get out and switch on the perimeter and do the things that Whiteside can't, and so he sort of makes up for the general slow foot speed that Kelly Olynyk has. So if Whiteside's moved, all of a sudden you could see Miami's entire front court change, not just at the center position.
Adebayo is one of those guys. I've got these experimental dynasty-type metrics that I'm looking at that he projects out as being a potential in the next 7 years, a top 25 type of guy. Now, that seems really lofty at this point, but I wrote an article about it the other day, which obviously hasn't been posted because Basketball Monsters hasn't opened up for this season, but talking about the value of these guys. And after their rookie seasons, no one would have expected Paul George or Jimmy Butler to be consistent top 15 players. But they do jump to that level, and Adebayo's got that potential to be that guy who can contribute in points. He can rebound, he can pass. We saw him handling the ball and being a pseudo point guard in summer league. He blocks shots. He's efficient. He showed so many different skills last season, and while he may not see much of the court this year, there is that real talent there with Bam. And it can't be ignored. Now, as for Olynyk, he is ranked 89th on Yahoo. Again, it feels a little bit high, but if you give him 28 minutes a night, then he probably jumps higher than that. Just, again, finding those minutes. It's all going to come down to how Spoelstra treats Whiteside. If that trade goes down, when it goes down, if they decide that they can work Olynyk and Whiteside together, which they probably can't. But if that happens, we saw how good Olynyk was in the playoffs for this team, and we've seen it in stretches in Boston as well. He was excellent for this team. You could make plenty of arguments that he was the best center on this team for big stretches. He was the 95th ranked player last season. I just think that it might be a little bit hard for him to get back to that as a general rule, but he could easily smash through that depending on how things work. How impressive was Olynyk last season? Because people look at him and go, man, he's just a goof. He just pulls people's arms out. Typical thug. He's just not that at all. He is a very, very accomplished player in many facets of the game.
Yeah, didn't pull a single arm out of a socket last year, so let's start giving him some credit. Look, I had him at the end of the year. We did on Locked On Heat. We did sort of the end of season awards, and I had him as my MVP for the Heat. He was so important for this team, and really, when you talk about Eric Spoelstra, playing a guy like Kelly Olynyk at center is much more in his comfort zone than playing a guy like Hassan Whiteside at center. Spoelstra wants to run a motion offense where everybody is a threat on the floor. I mean, a few years ago during the Big Three era, Eric Spoelstra went out to an Oregon practice and met with then Oregon Ducks football coach Chip Kelly. And what he took away from that was the fact that there was no tight end who was just a blocking tight end. There wasn't a fullback that was just a blocking fullback. The running back could catch out of the backfield. Everybody was a threat to score at any play. And the next year you sort of saw Spoelstra really lean into that quote-unquote positionless basketball. And he realized, if you're on the floor, you need to be a threat to score and to be able to be a threat to shoot at any given point. And that's what Kelly Olynyk brings to the table. Not only is he a good three-point shooter at the center position, he's very comfortable with the ball in his hands, facilitating from the triple threat position, comfortable running those dribble handoffs. Another thing that Bam Adebayo, by the way, has in common with him, we talk about point Bam all the time as far as just doing that driving and kicking and kind of flashy stuff in Summer League. The point of the story is that he is comfortable with the ball in his hands. You can't necessarily say that about Hassan Whiteside, who sometimes seems to want to try to get rid of it as soon as possible, even if it just means heaving a shot towards the rim sometimes. So with that, I do think at the end of games, you're going to see if Whiteside sort of if it's a bad Whiteside night, you'll see Kelly Olynyk get on the floor. And if Kelly Olynyk's on the floor, it sort of opens up how versatile Spoelstra could be with the rest of that five-man group.
Lastly, Wes, let's talk Justice Winslow, a player who had a lot of, hype behind him over the last couple of years, hasn't really been able to live up to that. It is his fourth season. He's had a couple of injuries throughout the early parts of his career. But where's Winslow fitting in on this team? Is he a point guard? Is he a power forward? Is he a small forward? What can he do to take a step forward this season? Is it all just about the shooting, or is he just going to be relied upon for his defensive abilities more so than in previous seasons?
Yes, all of the above. I mean, he is going to be Miami's utility player coming off the bench, more likely than not. Probably listed on a depth chart as maybe the backup power forward behind James Johnson, but when he comes in, he'll play a similar role to James Johnson in that he'll be able to play some point forward for him. If Dragic is off the floor, you could see Winslow becoming the backup point guard like he was, especially in the playoffs last year. I think that if you really want to know, kind of get a sneak peek into what Justice Winslow's season should look like, just watch the 76ers series, because he came out with more intensity than we've seen, was free shooting the ball from three-point range, and played a lot of that point guard spot, too, off the bench. So that is probably the best use of Justice Winslow, and I think that the Heat understand that, they know that, and that's what they're going to try to get out of him this upcoming season, because that was a team with Dwayne Wade, right? So if Wade comes back, Winslow could still play a similar role. It doesn't matter that Wade's there, and so there's enough in that 76ers series to get the Heat confident and excited in what Winslow can do. I think this is going to be a breakout year for Justice Winslow. I don't know what a breakout year looks like in productivity, but I think we're going to finally see sort of what people were hoping Justice Winslow would be when he was picked in the lottery a couple seasons ago, right? He averaged about 8 points per game last year, 5.5 rebounds. I think it was, or 5.5 rebounds, 2.5, almost 2.2 assists last year. I think that you could see his assist numbers double. I would not be surprised at all by that. Get a few more rebounds and even maybe hover around 10 points per game, as another 2 or 3 points per game would not shock me. So I really like the potential for Winslow to just sort of be this box score stuffer when he's not only doing all those things on offense, but getting steals, getting blocks, and just forcing his way onto the floor because of his general versatility. Because depending on the matchup, you could play him at a stretch four. You could play him or a small ball four would be a more accurate term. You could play him at backup point guard. Hell, you could play that guy at center like he did as a rookie in the playoffs against the Raptors. There's just a lot of ways that you could play Justice Winslow. And so for that, I think he'll just find his way on the floor, because Eric Spoelstra likes those kinds of guys who we could just sort of throw out there, and then they sort of just figure out what the game needs from them.
The interesting thing with Winslow is last season he was the 217th ranked player. The year before he was the 217th ranked player. But he played exactly 10 minutes less per game last season. So his per minute production actually increased quite significantly. The problem is that he did go down by 10 minutes per game. He was in that season where he only played the 18 games in 16-17. He was playing almost 35 minutes per night. Last season he was at 25 minutes per night. And I think that 25 to 26 zone is probably more realistic, just given the depth of how this team goes. He's not going to be pushing back to that 35. Because if he was playing 35 a night, then he'd be worthwhile looking at as a top 150, top 120 type of guy. With the strides that he took with his rebounding, he got his steal rate pretty solid, doubled his block rate. The assists were pretty solid. He started hitting threes and doing it more efficiently, but still, in his 3 NBA seasons, he hasn't had a year of a true shooting over 50%, so he's been wildly inefficient through all of his career. If that can take a step up, not outside the realms of possibility, then those other numbers are attractive. But it's getting those minutes. It seems like it's going to be a tough challenge to get back to that 30 for this season. But again, when players take that big step up, then the minutes are given to him because they're obviously one of the key guys on the team. So if he can take that step forward, then the minutes will come. But he's not someone I'm really looking at this point in the season as being a considerable contributor to this Miami Heat team in terms of fantasy production. But he will be a key rotation guy for them all season. Wes, first of all, let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter, and secondly, what you guys have got going on over at Locked On Heat at the moment.
So on Twitter, you can find me at WC Goldberg, and then you can follow the Locked On Heat show over at Locked On Heat on Twitter. And then as far as what we got going on Locked On Heat, David Ramil, my co-host, and I, we do a mailbag every Monday, which is a lot of fun. It gives us a great chance to interact with listeners. And then coming up, we will be having a Heat season preview written form that we'll be offering to our listeners, as well as covering some of those topics on the podcast. But check us out on the mailbag. The best way to leave us questions for the mailbag is we do it via iTunes reviews, kind of a win-win for everybody. And so you just sort of leave a 5-star review say something nice about the show, preferably, and then ask your question in the review. Or say something mean about the show and ask your question in the review. We'll probably answer it anyway. And so, yeah, that's the best way to find us.
Go and listen to Locked On Heat, follow them, and subscribe to the podcast the same as you do here, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher, and on Spotify. You can also find us on YouTube. Give it a thumbs up and a comment over there. Wes, thanks again for jumping on and talking about the Miami Heat for this coming season.
Thanks for having me.
Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Josh Richardson.